Inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway, this is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today, and as I continue to traverse the musical landscape of our cultural heritage, it is refreshing and humbling to connect with somebody who I wasn't necessarily completely familiar with prior to dear friend Stephen Schuster hipping me to him. But now that I have, I realize that he's part of a lexicon of new musical vocabulary, especially as it relates to angular blues picking. He came up at a time when really the significance of music was deeply rooted in our culture. In some ways, it drove the cultural zeitgeist of our country, which is sadly to say not the case today. But, I thought that at the very least he could provide some wisdom and inspiration for future generations' understanding of how real music is made. Peter Kaukonen, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, thank you so much, and I think future generations are going to be in bad trouble if they're going to rely on me for inspiration.
Well, I think, I wanted to ask you, I've had an opportunity recently to interview Dean Parks and Louis Shelton, and both of them were guitarists that came to LA really when the studio scene, this was the Wrecking Crew was fully ensconced in the scene, and they were jazzers through and through. I mean, they'd come up playing bebop, and they really didn't like rock and roll. They could play it, but they really didn't like it. And the producers, quite frankly, didn't know how to arrange for rock tunes. They'd say, play that Swamp Thing, or play that Jimi Hendrix kind of thing. But it was in its infancy. And I wanted to ask you, being that there was no term really in the lexicon for rock or funk, in terms of blues, what was the template for you to learn? Was it really were you just always a street scholar, or was anything codified when you were first coming up?
Wow, could you translate that into English? Codified.
Dude, swing it, man. Just go with it.
Yeah, what did you just say? That's an interesting entree into our conversation, in that I have twin boys. They are 16, and they are fastened to earbuds as they listen to a contemporary palette of sounds. I'm not sure what they really listen to, and every now and then they say, I really like the old stuff, but they're unfamiliar with people like Jimi Hendrix. They haven't listened to him. They're not familiar with his recordings or his stylings. And the conversation that I have with them is something to the effect that one of the many differences between so-called music now and what you and I presume many of your listeners grew up listening to, is that musicians at that time actually spent time mastering a craft on an instrument.
That's right.
Rather than manipulating a computer that would generate artificial sounds that could be then quantized into rigid beats. So
exactly.
In response to your question, you're talking about a blues background and a knowledge of American musicology, which really needs to be acknowledged, because the black influence on music shaped rock and roll as we came to understand it through the latter part of the 60s into the 70s. And I would bring to people's attention the recent biography of Michael Bloomfield, which talks about somebody really an astonishing musician and a stunning guitarist, the likes of whom we really need to acknowledge and would love to see again. I think in answer to your question, my formative period was that when my high school peers were listening to the bevy of Frankie Avalon or Fabian, I had Muddy Waters albums and Howling Wolf albums and Little Walter. And when it came time to actually pick up an instrument in the beginning of the folk era, I started finger picking blues, and I listened to Gary Davis and Lightning Hopkins, and so that was kind of the grist for my formative mill.
Oh, I love this. You guys, I mean, I interviewed your brother a couple of years ago, and to this day, out of 2,000 interviews, he gave me the greatest word that I never knew existed. Both of you are wordsmiths. He referred to, and the tragedy is I can't remember who he was talking about, so I'll have to go back and listen to the interview, but he called somebody a biophile. It's one of the greatest one of the greatest terms I've ever heard, and you're already waxing poetic. But what I'm trying to get at, and I think you know, it's interesting because, you know, you said it was a craft, because I think in theory, and you are an example of this, is that a musician was looked at as clearly a professional. It was a professional gig. Maybe you weren't getting rich off of it, but the point is you put time into your craft because you knew there was something coming out on the other side that would, quote unquote, become a career. The record industry was not completely run by the bean counters at that point, and there was a lot of creative control. You know, see Black Kangaroo and Grunt and the you know, again, nobody was talking about making a huge amount of money, but I guess to the point
but
that
I think actually we're doing it because we wanted to get laid.
Well, that and that's, you know what, and seeing and getting hot chicks, or just in general, I mean, that is the essential. It's essential for everything in life, and I guess they were still flocking. But the other thing is, I remember talking to your brother, and, you know, dude, I mean, Dave Van Ronk treated him like crap. I mean, he was like, go sit in the corner, dude. Like, you're just a young dude. And when he came out to San Jose, it was really a fertile hotbed of folk music. I guess you could throw blues in there as well. But I just wonder, in terms of your getting your own individual sound, were you an autodidact, and just were you ear trained, and how do you, and where did your ears grow the most on the bandstand?
Yes, I am in fact an autodidact, and there's a plus and there's a minus to that. And I will tell you the minus when I tell you where the ears grew, and that was because my family was musical, if not necessarily in playing all the time, playing actual musical instruments. My father was an audiophile, not just a biophile.
Wow. Oh, okay, audiophile. I forget who. I just love the word biophile. He also used the word ensconced, which I use all the time now. The Kaukonens have the greatest language I've ever heard in my life. Continue.
So he always had what passed for state-of-the-art high fidelity, when high fidelity was, and because he was a career diplomat, and because he was stationed overseas, and because I grew up overseas, I was exposed to what we now politely call world musics at a very, very early age, as well as living in countries. I lived in Pakistan for 2 years, so I got to hear all kinds of stuff.
Oh my, you're blowing my mind, right? So tell me a little bit about, because this is so beautiful. Most people would access Folkways Records, and, you know, they'd get all the ethnic music that, you know, the Buddhist.
Well,
yeah.
My parents were they were intellectuals in the true sense of the word. I mean, they were educated people who were interested and interesting and liked to find out more. And when I was, in fact, in the 6th grade, kind of a sabbatical in the United States between postings, my parents to play child's ballads.
Wow.
And I got to hear and see that, back to back with having a Pakistani trio on sitar and tablas doing a house blessing when we moved into a new house in Karachi.
This is absolutely one of the greatest stories I've ever heard.
You blurred out there a little bit.
This is one of the greatest stories I've ever heard in my life. Can you explain, as a young boy, what that feeling was like to hear odd-metered music?
Oh, God, it was wonderful. Oh, it was really wonderful. The first night waking up in a new dwelling in Pakistan, I heard sounds of singing and pipes, and looked down to see a monkey, bandarwala, beneath my window, a guy with a monkey, and the monkey was dancing while he was playing music. Oh, it was great. And there were, we could hear the muezzins calling the faithful to prayer 5 times a day from my balcony in a Muslim country.
Because I've interviewed guys, Mike Mayneri comes to mind, and this is like 61, where he was going on these military prop planes over to Afghanistan and Kathmandu, and Buddy Rich, they were playing, a little bit of jazz, but they were playing for women that had birds coming out of their brassieres. They're playing for jugglers, and then these crowds of essentially ethnic people from these countries that were still in the dark, quote unquote, were there sort of taking this stuff in. But I recognize, and again, the Russians were there too. The U.S. were trying to sell tanks to these countries. There was propaganda going on. But do you feel like what was it like just as a boy? Those countries are impossible. I mean, I guess there are ambassadors there now, diplomats to a degree, but it's not safe for regular Westerners to go there. I mean, can you talk about how the music, if you believe the music was a factor in helping these disparate countries trust each other more?
I'm not sure I can respond to that question. What I will say is that when I'm 75 now, so my exposure to these countries was in the mid-50s. It was a completely different world. And in the post-Second World War, the American realpolitik hadn't had the impact that we now see it having today. So, by that I mean living in Pakistan, where there were huge refugee populations from the partition when the British divided the Indian subcontinent. In the aftermath of the dissolution of the British Raj into Hindu and Muslim countries, in vast populations had been unsettled and become refugees, I was still able to bicycle around with absolute safety and no concern for my safety, even as the people there, the workers, were armed. I mean, they were carrying guns, they were carrying knives because they'd come out of war zones. Does this?
Dude, I'm taking this. This is so important, man. I cannot believe how important.
And I guess one of the ramifications of this is, I mean, I moved over to Karachi, Pakistan when I was 10, 11 years old. And I lived overseas for maybe 14 years and speak 4 languages poorly, including English. And I guess that gives me a perspective on the world that Americans, many whom do not stray far from their initial zip codes, don't have.
And tell me a little bit, just for the layperson, because I've done so much work interviewing all these cats who came over when you said the American body politic had not necessarily completely taken root yet. They were basically coming here around the time that Eisenhower began to warn about the military-industrial complex. But, guys like Wolfgang Meltz, Jan Hammer, John McLaughlin, Aerto, like these guys. Can you talk about your viewpoint and clearly your parents were like incredibly cultured cats and smart and savvy and did yeoman's work, but what is your viewpoint of the world? I want to go to Egypt, and I can't. These places are cut off now.
Yes, that's true.
For those who don't wander too far from their zip code unless they're planning seditious actions, what would you, how would you describe your viewpoint of this world we live in and the kind of exposure you had to it?
I'm sure we're all familiar with Bill Hicks.
Yes.
He was certainly far more than a comedian ever was, and a social commentarist. His perspectives hold; they're as valid now as they were then. And one of the things he said the last time I looked, the world was round, implying that I would say that we all breathe the same air, and we eat food and we eat water, and so there's a commonality which we choose to ignore. But I can't ignore that. That's kind of my condensed response to your question.
I guess you were riding around on a bicycle in Pakistan, and people were armed. We're going through a lot of we're going pretty hard right now, but I'm 42 and I have two daughters, and I try to I've done my best to not quote unquote helicopter parent them, but to most younger parents that would seem like petrifying to let their young Peter go out on a bike around. But I've interviewed enough guys that have been around the world to know that we are more alike than we aren't. And this lack of trust, and did you feel, can you talk about a seminal moment of connecting with these people on a musical level, whether it was seeing somebody play a tambourine in the meter of 17 or, to me it's fascinating because I was not aware that your folks were, or your dad was a diplomat. I mean, this is some of the headiest stuff I've ever heard in my life. And I guess all I'm trying to get at is I don't want to be Pollyannish or pie in the sky, but did you ever, what was different after the body politic, the American body politic became set, and what was different about it before? Was it just that these quote-unquote third world countries were still in darkness and fighting themselves, and then we became interventionists? What can you explain exactly what that means as far as before body politic and after?
Well, I'm kind of be reluctant to go into detail on this at risk of becoming a target, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, okay, no, just in a pen.
However,
but, yeah, go ahead.
Let me respond tangentially.
Please.
And circumlocutously to you.
This, dude, you are circumlocutus
in the world, and we're contrasting when I'm 9 or 10 years old, riding a bicycle in Karachi, Pakistan, and our reluctance now to let our children go out of doors and have casual play encounters.
That's right. That's right.
So we can ask what's changed in the world that America, for example, has become such an unsafe place we can't let our kids out on the street unchaperoned or unsupervised. And their social interactions in pre-COVID times had to be arranged. Does this kind of give you a lens?
It is so spot on. And going back to everybody. I remember interviewing David Garibaldi, the drummer from Tower of Power, and he said that if somebody came up to him after a gig and said, "Man, you sounded great. You sounded just like so and so and so," he would want to slit his wrists because he wanted everybody was striving for their own individual sound. I mean, I go back to when I interviewed Bill Cosby before the world caved in on him. I mean, he would talk about putting on a blindfold, and he'd have somebody put on any Blue Note record, and he could tell the difference in drumming in the time feel between Tony Williams and Pete LaRocca and Mickey Roker. Everybody had their own individual sound. Your brother had his own sound. You had your own sound. Everybody was striving for individuality, whereas in today's world, and this goes across all genres of music, in my mind, there's a homogenization of sound. I have a very hard time, especially instrumental music, I have a very hard time detecting who is who. And granted, I'm not ensconced in pop music or what is the music of, the blues music of modern times or jazz music of modern times, but it's directly related to the fact that I can't tell who anybody is. So I'm curious if you could talk about how you, whether there was any there's any formula or not, or there any logic or not, how you, Peter Kaukonen, look to develop your own individual sound on your apparatus.
I think part of what you're experiencing is that we, with the proliferation of digital technology that has transformed the way music is created, perceived, consumed, listened to, and its function as a psychosocial sacrament, meaning we used to anticipate the release of a record album because we knew who our artists were, and we would have a personal connection to them, and then he would come home and he would pop it on a turntable and roll up a sacrament and share it with our friends. We now have so many micro markets.
Right.
That it is hard to differentiate, and you have a computer responding to your listening to somebody saying, if you like this, you can listen to 2,474 people from different places in the world playing the same shit. So there is no sense of connection. I don't have a sense of connection to individual artists anymore currently,
right.
Although that's not what I listen to do. Clearly, looking to master an instrument, to get on top of a craft, meant how can I express my own individuality and make that accessible to other people as they listen to me, rather than just recycling what they're already hearing from someplace else. Does this kind of make sense?
You're doing, dude. You are on fire. I'm taking in every, I guess more to the point. Like guys like David Bromberg, to a certain extent. I mean, they were carrying the good Reverend's guitar case to gigs for him. They were with these people directly. I mean, Airto would go up to Elvin Jones, and Elvin was a scary guy. But he was a scary looking guy. But then when you engaged him, I remember Airto saying his teeth were very white. He was very I mean, I guess here's the point, man. This is the other thing, is that, can you just talk about a time that you were able to, your idols or people, your heroes were accessible? In the sense that you could go and you could learn, you could try, and you could connect with them. They weren't surrounded by entourages or corporations. They weren't put in these ISO boxes. And out of those cats, you, little Walter and those, did you get a chance to mingle with people that you considered your idols?
I had the great good fortune to be able to meet some of these people. I clearly Muddy Waters, Albert King, Howlin' Wolf. They were playing small clubs in the Bay Area around. I got to meet them. I got to sit in with them. I think my real idol was the great keyboardist Bill Evans. And I had the great good fortune to see him a number of times and actually socialize and play with him.
No, wait, you are blowing, dude. Schuster said you were a wily cat. Are you kidding me? Are
No.
you kidding me? This is So let's just break this down. You're Musselwhite, Charlie Musselwhite. When I interviewed him, speaking of, and I can feel his presence. And again, I was birthed in 1978, so Bloomfield was well under. I mean, unfortunately, he tragically passed away not too soon after. But Michael was integral in convincing Bill Graham to bring those Chicago blues.
To diversify his musical offerings, and it was a spectacular thing he did, because that was, oh God, those shows were great.
I really want you to talk about the small. Can you talk about the first time or one of these seminal moments of going in? What were these blues clubs? Maybe the saloon. I'm less hip. I'm more hip to the Jackson Sutter and the Jimbo's Bop City than I am the blue. What were the blues clubs that you saw these guys in? And
let's see, there was of course the Matrix.
Right.
There was Uncle Charlie's out in Corte Madera. Jeannie was the patron of that. There was the Sweetwater, of course, Mill Valley. There was the Ark in Sausalito. There was the Lion's Share out in San Anselmo. But I got to tell you, the most transformational musical experience I had was when I was living in Stockholm, Sweden.
Go ahead.
And it was summer, so of course the sun we had maybe 4 or 5 hours of dark and twilight, and I went to a jazz spot called the Golden Circle to hear a guy named Bill Evans, and he was playing with Chuck Israels and Larry Bunkert.
Dude? Those are I just interviewed Chuck. I got to send you my interview with Chuck. The guy was playing with Pete Seeger in 1950, and then 8 years later he was recording with Coltrane. I can't believe Peter Kaukonen, blowing my mind. So Israel,
I've got to get this interview because when I saw Bill Evans, I'm just about ready to cry.
Go, please cry. It's wonderful. This is wonderful.
It was a transformational moment for me that it just glows. Because here's people say, who's your favorite musician? Oh, who's your favorite one? Bill Evans. I can't play guitar like him. I can't play piano like him. But he embodied what music and time and space should be. Oh my God!
No, bless. Listen, this is what my show's about, and when I throw on the analog cassette for my daughters of Live at the Village Vanguard with Paul Motion, who was a Sufi, and Scotty LaFaro. Peter,
oh boy.
It sounds different every time. It sounds like the solos are different. I can't understand when he touched that ivory, when the space that he left, his ability to open up the space to allow the bass player.
My God.
It was. Can you talk about what you remember from the Golden Circle? I know Stan Getz was dwelling out there as well.
Yes, he was.
And because I was for a minute working on a documentary on this volatile genius, the nexus. But talk a little bit about the phrasing, the dynamics, and why you were almost moved to tears just now about that whole trio.
Oh my God! Yeah. Well, as I say, I'm an autodidact, and I don't have the formalized language to describe this experience, but this is music that makes your soul breathe.
Exactly.
Yeah. You need to send me a mailing address, and I will burn you a copy of Bill Evans, a recording that Bill made in Sweden with a jazz vocalist named Monica Zetterlund.
And you recorded this?
No, I did not record this. But I will burn you a CD because that's what I do.
Of course.
And as a monaural recording, this is one of the greatest sounds, just spectacular performances. And her singing Comden and Green songs. Oh my!
It's fine. This is why I wanted Schuster. I mean, you guys are all cut from the same cloth, man. It's just this is what music is about, man. It's touching the heart, dropping into the primordial gut. Unfortunately, your twins, and you were waxing poetic about it. They have been inundated with quantized rhythm, and
Yes.
with machines. And you have situations where now you have human beings playing machine parts. I'm talking about rhythm specifically. And that's part of the lilting quality of Evans, is that his own inner time feel, is just, I mean, he didn't play, I mean, he had chops, but it was more about, like, it was like what he didn't play. I mean, it was the void was the music
Yes.
too. It was it's insane. And it's just the most emotive stuff. I was, I don't know when. I mean, I remember before COVID, I went to the Sausalito Cruising Club, where the venerable.
Yes, I know it well.
What's that?
I know it well. Yes.
You do know. So the venerable, legendary mensch Roy Blumenfeld was holding court there.
Roy and I collaborated in musical projects any number of times, and I've played at the Cruising Club any number of times.
So maybe you were even there when. I mean, the point is, he told me the story that was one of the last one of the last boats, and Bill Evans, when he was on the hideout from the IRS in the early '70s, used to come there and play the piano that's still in there.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
So wait, when did you begin? When did you connect with Bill and talk about the opportunity to get to play with this guy?
Well, this goes back again to San Francisco of another time, when the San Francisco Chronicle was actually a credible newspaper, as so many others were.
Right, I agree.
Yes. And they had a columnist named John Wasserman, Wassy, who is a very dear friend of mine.
Is he still with us?
Say again?
Is he still with us? Is he still here?
No, John is long.
Because I'm not, I'm more hip to Ralph Gleason. It's the first time I've heard this Wassy's name. So go ahead.
Yeah, Wasserman was not just a music critic. He was a general commentarist, and he was a very bright and very funny man who, anyway, and he would have soirees, get-togethers. And at some of these soirees to which I and my then wife were invited, there was Clint Eastwood and
this is great.
And Bill Evans, because Clint Eastwood was also a
jazz freak.
I'm sorry, what?
He was a jazz freak. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so I got to meet Bill a number of times, and John had a piano and said, "Bring a guitar," and Bill was very gentle and very patient with me, because that's not my genre, and certainly exceeded my.
Holy
but
cow!
He was a lovely man.
I'm not exactly sure. So, just for the record, coming up, I remember your brother, focusing, he talked about Garcia and him. They really weren't into the swinging dick kind of thing, like the wankers and the riffology cats. Like, they were more into the soul and that was the leadership that came out of that entire milieu. You were born in 1945. When did you? And then you also went to Stanford. When did you start to marinate in the Bay Area? When did you get out there?
63.
63?
Yes. So I certainly played the folk circuit with my brother in Freiburg, who was
oh boy, a big troublemaker.
And Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Stompers and Pigpen and Yak.
Oh, wait, well, hold on a second, because this is really important. My second book, I'm going to send you my books because you're going to lose your mind. You'll eventually be in one of these books because you've already blown my mind. But were you hip to the Perry Lane crew? Were you at Stanford at that time in '63, or were you just doing?
Yes.
Okay, so can you talk to me a little bit about your experiences, if any, with Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters?
And Ken Kesey's, I'm trying to remember, it's not Woodside, it's La Honda.
Absolutely, yes, La Honda.
Stanford Hills. And so I made perfunctory visits, of course, but I attended the acid tests and passed them, I dare say.
This is so great. I can't believe you, man. So you come out to Stanford in '63. One of the guys that I interviewed, a guy named Roy Seaburn, was a prankster. He talked about, the 50s, especially in San Francisco, a very volatile time. It's not dissimilar to kind of what we're seeing in sort of microbursts today, where you had a lot of bohemians running into violence with the law enforcement, and then it really spawned, what you might say is this, revolution of consciousness through LSD. Vic Lovell was actually at the Ram Dass who's Richard Alpert at the time. He was a psychologist or psychiatrist.
Yes, I'm well acquainted with Baba Ram Dass.
Can you talk about your relationship with him? I mean, how did you?
Well, I never knew him personally, but I certainly was aware of his arc through spiritual exploratory history. He's a fascinating character to me because I was just reflecting on him, and he would talk about, well, I spent months in this little cubicle in fucking Thailand just by myself, and they'd bring me food. But he was a horn dog.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So all his spiritual thing, he'd come out and he'd fuck his brains out. Like anything that moved, he'd go after it.
Oh, dude. Because actually that the late great John Perry Barlow told me that Richard Alpert was quite honestly a snake oil salesman for a little bit.
I dare say.
And because of that April experiment. But so you get out to Stanford. Let's talk a little bit about. Can you talk about, this was Sandoz acid, the cleanest in the world. And can you talk a little bit about, your experiences with LSD? I took a ton of it about 20 years ago when I was at Boston University, and it was really
it's part of your education, isn't it?
Well, it was one of the biggest parts of my education, but I was taking placebo cocktails. This was not what you were ingesting, and I just would love you to talk about that precious, precious time of St. Michael's Alley, pure Sandoz acid, and Peter Kaukonen and Steven Schuster cooking the groove at Tangent Pizza, the Tangent.
I'm trying to frame this.
This is only set one, by the way. We're not going to get through your whole. You're quite a biophile. We're not going to get through everything today. But give me give me something to chew on. Even a bone.
Yes, and I'd like to. How much more time do we have here?
No, we got at least 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. Because I appreciate walking through memory lane, but I would also like to transition to a present and deal with issues, impact of age's impact and environmental impact on music and being a musician.
Dude. Again, I want to be very clear. We will, and I also want to be clear. Maybe it's memory lane for you. My show is not about preservation. My show is about promotion. And you might not think so. Absolutely, we're going to hit on the contemporary stuff. But
good.
But
so,
go ahead.
So let's go back to dropping acid at Stanford.
Yes.
And I got to tell you that Stanford, at that time, was a hostile environment. In that, at that time, we're looking at a Vietnam War and again a polarization of. And Stanford was frat boys, jocks, and sorority dollies. So people like myself who were growing their hair long were targets. And I'd had anti-Vietnam War poster on it. So in a way, it wasn't an idyllic setting for dropping acid.
Absolutely. It doesn't sound like it, actually.
But it was also, geez, I really don't, I've not I don't have a set response to this, unlike so much of my.
Well, I mean, so I guess maybe let's move it into the contemporary time. I mean, how did it fundamentally change? Did it break down any kind of dogma that had been in your life? Did it break rigid thought patterns? Did it where how has
God,
it?
I better take some right now.
Dude, I mean, this is a lot of people. You were tongue in cheek the other day about microdosing, but I mean it.
No, not really.
No, I know, because you're one of the hippest cats around. But I mean, let's just talk about. Fundamentally, how did it affect your view of humanity, and how did it break open your heart, if at all, to the wonder of life, and not close yourself off to be able to not just give, but to receive authentic love?
Boy, there's a challenge.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
We go deep on this show.
No, I'm really taking that seriously because we're looking at perpetual challenges of intimacy and connection.
Absolutely.
And the ability to be open to the giving and the reception thereof. And the idea, of course, is, as Baba Ram Das capitalized, you say, well, you can drop your acid and you'll have that oneness while you're loaded, but then you come down and you have to drop it all over again.
That's exactly right.
To recapture that space, whereas there are other non-chemical means of getting there.
Well, I look at my daughters today as a perfect example of, their generation is more intimate with technology than with another human being. There is a crisis with, and also it just comes down to people, can they leave? Can they keep their hearts open to receiving love? Part of what we just talked about before about trust in we are being one human race. People not allowing their kids to go outside to play, or quite frankly, people in general closing their hearts and they become shrouded in darkness. To me, LSD, psilocybin, they are ego deflators, but they're also, they open up your multisensory, your multidimensional self, and so. But it is a crisis. I talk about this with a lot of healers, Reiki healers. I obviously interview musicians, but with a lot of people, and it is a vexing thing where, not that there wasn't debauchery and shameful stuff going on when you were coming of age, but this idea of connectivity, giving and receiving love, was much more authentic amongst your generation, and even as a Gen Xer, my generation, than it is amongst millennials, because of this inanimate technology that has, and like you talked about with the music, in many ways, technology has superseded humanity. And so it's a very deep and real conundrum as we move forward here.
And I certainly would not argue that with you. In a previous lifetime, I was a clinical psychologist.
What?
And I look at this world, this digital domain, which is marketed and foisted upon us as a way of connecting, and we know this not to be the truth. It is a way of distancing and isolating people in their separate, disparate little worlds. And I think that as a platform of relating to people, you cannot cue off of emotions and create empathy. Compounded by the isolation of plague times,
Right.
where you are now cloistered, I hope, in a away from people, and when you go out, you wear a mask over your face, so you can't read expressions, nor can yours be read.
That's right. That's right.
How are we ever going to come out of this one?
You know, I think it's. I wanted to just get your take on the idea of, you know, when you talk about Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Champions, David Freiberg, your brother, yourself. I mean, you know, is it fair to say that it was vogue to be a skiffle player?
I'm waiting.
Was at that time, coming up in the early '60s, most of the cats, the Sons of Champlin, were the most. I mean, this is going down a little, maybe a few years later, but out of all those Bay Area bands, most of them were skiffle players, folk players. And I just wanted. Today, we've gotten into the academy. Everything goes through the academy, and everything's been codified. And we talked about that homogenization of sound. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about your musical approach and a bridge to the future about essentially being, what if it was vogue to be a skiffle player at that time?
I'm not sure I understand or have ever known what skiffle was.
Okay, you know, skiffle was.
I'm going to translate. I mean, I remember Lonnie What's-His-Face from England. He was a skiffle player. It was kind of a folky, rhythmic.
Yeah, I think in the grander scheme of things, a skiffle player is somebody who is basically not academically trained. They just pick up instruments and play them, and then if they have the doggedness and tenacity, they continue to get better over time based on bandstand experience, not wanking it in their room. The Beatles would be considered, skiffle players.
I would consider Alan Holdsworth then a skiffle player because he was not an educated musician.
Well, and even, I mean, what about Howlin' Wolf and
well, he was. Well, a lot of his stuff was arranged by Willie Dixon.
That's right. You know, I'm just talking more about the point of being able to just, you know, I think people were obsessed now in at least in, I don't want to say in melodic improvisation. Some people call that jazz, but if Peter Kaukonen and I walked around the streets of San Francisco, we'd get 20 different definitions of what the word jazz is. So I don't really like labels so much, but everybody is obsessed with chops and facility and technique. And all the masters and the shamans that I've interviewed and the guys that came before them, if they were watching people demonstrating and wanking it, they'd fall asleep. I mean, it was like watching paint peel off the walls. I just am trying to get at the organic nature of how you approached your apparatus that led itself to individual sound. You know, I mean, it has to do with the fact that there was no, there were a couple of schools that offered music curriculum outside of the classical bag. You guys were kind of making up your own rules.
On Michael Bloomfield's biography, which I would
Yes.
bring to your attention as a fascinating and tragic piece of work.
No doubt.
And his commentary, I don't remember the title, but it's quite recent and should be in your local library. And Michael's comment on the San Francisco's scene, which we know to be really seminal in the formation of musical tastes, styles, and exploration, coinciding as it was with a sexual revolution and a psychopharmacological revolution. His comment was something to the effect that these guys are just folk players. They don't know how to play a fucking electric guitar. I do. Because he'd been playing electric guitar as well as acoustic guitar with all the black players in Chicago. And he understood his instrument and its applications and its technologies. And when I think about so many of the oh gosh, can't we get a playback on that?
No, it dropped for a sec. No, Bloomfield said he was on the bandstand with the Cats playing.
Yes.
Okay, in Chicago. And
well, he had experience and history with his technology. He had played electric guitars and he knew his amplifiers and what that would do. He wasn't transitioning from a folk setting to a Fender and a twin reverb all of a sudden.
Dig.
So he was, I believe, quite correctly mildly critical of the San Francisco guitar players whose tones were kind of like fingernails on a blackboard or glass breaking, and whose approach to soloing was unformed and self-indulgent.
There you go. Listen to your playback. You still have it, man. All right, I'm going to ask you about.
I forgot what we were talking about. What?
No, dude. This is a stream of this is like a pharmacological revolution right now. No, this is
we're all revolting.
Well, I mean, what else we got? The thing is,
yeah.
I'm gonna bring up three names, and because I've done a deep dive into this, and I just want you to talk about their relevance because they were before Michael came to the Bay Area. I mean, I've interviewed Barry Goldberg. You know, those guys, him and Michael went to the black clubs together in Chicago. Those guys mentored them. They let them sit in. I mean, it was an apprenticeship. It was remarkable.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so
and achieved an equality and an acceptance.
Absolutely, dude.
Yes.
By the way, just for the record, Michael Bloomfield, the name of the autobiography, "The Rise and Fall of an American Guitar Hero." The three cats I'm gonna list to you in my mind were two of them were the forerunners of what you would call rock and roll guitar or surf guitar in the Bay Area, and I wanted to know what effect, if any, they had on you. One was John Cipollina, the other was Jerry Miller, and then my favorite cat is a guy who came along with the Sons of Champlin, which was Terry Haggerty.
Oh boy.
Okay, so let's just talk about those three cats because I would venture to say that Bloomfield
was,
wouldn't.
Of course, famous with Quicksilver.
Right.
And he played in SG, and then had a number of carving guitars, and had acoustic amps or high frequency horns. I never was enthusiastic about his tone. I thought it was quite painful.
Yeah, I agree with you. But he did have a major rig, though. He did have a rig, and he was an early rocker. He definitely didn't come from the folk.
Correct.
Yeah, right. Continue.
Correct.
Yes.
But I don't. His playing, with all due respect to his sister Cheech, Antonia, of whom I'm very fond, and who taught my boys piano. And you know, Mario was one of my first bass players way back in.
Wait. But Mario is a dear friend. I was at the top of the hill at his dad's place 2 years ago with his sister, one of his sisters. I think it's the same one that you're talking about. His mom was his mom and Nicky Hopkins. Yeah, his mom and Nicky Hopkins used to do double pianos, and Mario would be
Yes.
on a hill smoking a joint at 11 years old.
Yes.
Oh my God, Mario
Yeah,
was one of your.
I loved Evelyn. She was great.
Oh my God, dude, and Gino, man, Gino got your brother and Jerry their first houses. Everybody, that guy was the man, dude.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, Cipollina's. I've never been able to get into Quicksilver, but anyway, he was a forerunner. He was not a folkie.
Yes, that's true. But you know, there's a difference between. I find that tone really quite difficult to metabolize, as I found my brother's tone and tremolo unable to bend a note quite to pitch and quite painful in his vibrato and tones. I like Miller's playing. He was playing what, a L5 or a Kessel or.
None of it all is about what it feels like in my heart. I'm not a musician myself, so I don't know what would. But yeah, his stuff. I think he gets often overlooked in the.
Yeah, he was a lovely player. He was fluid. He was not pretentious, and it was warm and connected. It made sense.
Right.
And Haggerty is just astonishingly still a wonderful player. Good God.
Dude, he is a beast. He says now, because I think this is one thing we just have.
You're fading.
There's so much in my mind that, I mean, you've blown my mind open today. He is a beast. Haggerty came out of the bastion of the, Turk Murphy. His dad was doing all that stuff, and then he was playing jazz gigs with Jerry Hahn, trading off with them, and then next thing you know, he's in the Sons of Champlin.
Great band, great group.
Really heady group. The question is, one thing that I really loved about the Kaukonens, I mean, a lot of people think that James Brown or Sly Stone were the inventors of funk, but in fact it was Johnny Talbot that was...
And Dee Thangs.
And your brother told me about going to the Fillmore when Charles Sullivan was still running the show, and that is still one of the mysteries that to this day I cannot believe. I believe it was a mob hit. I can't say that with a surety, but the point is, can you talk about the only three cats that would go down to when the Fillmore was a completely black enterprise? The only three jazzers that would go down there were Vince Guaraldi, Chet Baker, and the aforementioned Bill Evans. Talbot and the Thangs was playing funk music before there was even a term in the lexicon for that. I mean, were you I know your brother was there. Were you there checking that music out?
No, I missed that incarnation of the Fillmore, but I'm walking downstairs to look at my Fillmore poster with Johnny Talbot and Dee Thangs on it.
And Dee Thangs.
Who else was Dee Thangs?
Who else was on that bill, man?
Jefferson Airplane, Gabor Szabo, and Jimi Hendrix.
Oh my God.
No, where's my Dee Thangs?
Oh my God. Gabor Szabo, Dee Thangs, Peter Kaukonen, and Black Kangaroo, man. Put me to bed.
No, there's the Edwardian Ball. No, there's Johnny Winter. There's Monterey Pop. Let's see. Was it Muddy Waters? Quicksilver. Staples Singer, Muddy. Oh, it was Otis Redding with Johnny Talbot.
Wow.
It's on my studio wall. It's right next to my console. What the fuck? Here it is. Yep. Otis Redding with Johnny Talbot and Dee Thangs.
That was a shared bill, or Otis was playing with them?
Yeah. It was a shared bill with the Fillmore.
So, it's fair to say that we never really vetted this appropriately, but you were at the acid tests in San Jose, at Watts. Which ones were you at? I mean, I've vetted all this with Wavy.
I didn't go to Watts, but I sure was at San Jose. In the Trips Festival, I was there every day.
Now,
that was the aftermath of the Rolling Stones show in San Jose.
You're absolutely right. And the memory that Seaburn had was it was wall to wall people tripping. He was downstairs with Cassidy lighting matches. What are your memories, if anything? What were you there as a? I don't want to say a
participant.
Well, obviously, but I mean, you're a pretty seasoned cat. I mean, were you kind of providing entertainment at all, or were you just merely there as a tripper?
I think I was there more as an observer and a fringe participant.
Interesting. What did you observe?
I was wearing an orange shirt.
You're like the Trips Festival. Did you go to?
These are memories that are not going to float up clearly.
No, I understand. I totally understand.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear. Were you in the psychology program when Ram Dass was there?
No, I was studying psychopharmacology, human sexuality, and primitive musics, none of which were offered in the Stanford curriculum.
You're not jiving me? You're serious? That's what you were studying? You being
I was theoretically a sociology major.
So when did you decide to veer out of the thinking mind and enter the spirit mind of music? I mean, when did you turn the page to become Peter Kaukonen?
Well, I've always tried to be Peter Kaukonen, but I started playing guitar in 1961 when my grandfather gave me a 1947 slope-shouldered Gibson Jumbo that I got off of a West Virginia coal miner with black lung. I'm not making any of this shit up.
Dude, I cannot believe you're blowing my mind right now.
I still have that guitar. It's absolutely glorious. So I started playing when I was in prep school in the 11th grade, and as I say, I'm self-taught. And I still struggle with it. It's been on again, off again. And I'm wondering, is this time we transition to the existential challenges of mortality in music?
I think I want to do. Can we do set 2 next week? This has to be continued. You are.
Let's do that.
You're like a savant, dude. I mean, this is like This was chicken soup for the soul today, bro. I really thank you.
Ooh, with matzo balls.
Yes. Yeah, fur piece.
Great matzo balls.
Fur piece. No, listen, man. Peter, man, I'm going to have this up later tonight. I'm going to send you a friend request on Facebook because I'll be transcribing. You know, again, I want to.
I don't do Facebook.
I know, but what I want to say is, I just want to say that for a journalist, I agree with you about technology in and of itself in a vacuum is vapid and incredibly deleterious to connection of humanity. But if you use it a certain way,
and the soul they're on.
What's that?
And the soul they're on.
If you know, I mean, somehow after 10 years of just crashing the backboards, I have all my goal is to connect humanity using new media. And after 2,000 interviews and 3 books, I've connected I try to stretch back to the cats who played with Bill Monroe, the cats who played with Fats Domino and Ray Charles, the cats who played with...
I played with Ray Charles. I opened up for him in Stockholm, Sweden.
Well, okay, so I mean, this is just set 1, man. I'm so humbled and thank you for healing me today. And I'll email you. We'll set up a time to do part 2 next week.
And give me a hard mail address. I'll send you a disc.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Good to hear you, man.
All right. My great pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, just another whistle stop with Peter Kaukonen. Tremendous hang there. Really somebody who was ensconced and continues to inspire. As he said, it's an eternal journey and always learning on the apparatus. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show today. We will see you later. Thanks so much. This is Power Talk. 1210.